Hi, you've clicked on to today's tropical tidbit for Sunday, August 26th. Here in the Atlantic, big story is Isaac out here, and we'll zoom right into him. And he's moving along the coast of Cuba, like we talked about yesterday. Jumping across the Haitian mountains has allowed him to stay mostly over water on his trek towards the Florida Straits, which is allowing him to be much better organized than he would have been had he come over the eastern half of the island. But he is still struggling here, being in proximity to the landmass and lots of inflow coming out of the Cuban mountains now on his southeastern flank, and thus he's still somewhat disorganized. To me, it looks like there's a lot of dry air very integrated into his circulation, spinning away with him over here. I think he's going to have to get way out into the Gulf of Mexico before he gets fully rid of that. And for that reason, he's not a hurricane yet, but he's probably starting to get close. We don't have a plane in there right now, but there will be more later, and we'll gauge the intensity of this thing. But there's tropical storm force winds now coming into extreme South Florida and the Keys, and some of these bands coming into Southeast Florida will be having tropical storm winds with them as well. And this will probably be reaching hurricane intensity as it bypasses the Keys, the western portion of them. Here's the radar coming out of Key West, which I'll probably have to refresh here to get it to actually animate. There we go. You can see the center now coming west-northwest, and this is so far on schedule. And you can see it may be trying to develop some kind of an eye wall here, ragged looking right now, but as it approaches hurricane status, it should start getting this inner core going. That's going to be the key, is how fast it can mix out the dry air that you can see is pretty prevalent in some of these empty areas around the circulation where there isn't a lot of rain bands. If it can mix that out quickly and get an inner core and an eye, then it's going to strengthen a lot over the Gulf of Mexico, and the intensity will of course be somewhat difficult. But we can see rain coming into southern Florida here, probably tropical storm force winds and some of the stronger thunderstorms. Certainly the Keys in here are starting to get reports of 40 knot plus winds, and this will be the story for the rest of today. Not as bad as it could have been. This is not making a landfall in South Florida, and it's not a hurricane yet, so it could have been worse, and this will be just a major tropical storm day for them here. Now if we talk about the track of this thing, so far, it's on track, doing what it was supposed to do. But the long-term track has shifted again, and it just keeps shifting west, and I keep having to shift west with the models. And now look at where the models are today, going into Louisiana and Mississippi. The 11 a.m. NHC track is into Mississippi, which you'll see my track is very similar to, if not on top of, this morning. And the only outlier left to the right being the UK Met, and the European, I'll show you, is now over here in just east of Mobile Bay, coming in there, and that is an eastern outlier now a little bit, but it came west from yesterday's track. And really, this is such a tough situation because there's still a large envelope of how this is going to come into the coastline, and the fact that we have this coming towards basically a coal in the pattern. You have this ridge over the Rockies here, you have this trough coming into the eastern United States, and all I can really say is that this storm has basically hit the sweet spot. And it's amazing this is happening twice in 1 year, but the forecast is much more uncertain than it might seem when the models look clustered, but look at how much they've been shifting. Debbie earlier this year was also in the situation. If you're right there in the spot between a ridge and a trough and you can't decide which feature is going to capture the storm, the models have this issue and they start flip-flopping. We've seen the European go from Louisiana all the way to the Panhandle, though the European has actually had a strong victory with this storm, initially leading the models into the Gulf of Mexico. So the Euro has actually done the best on this storm from the beginning. But this kind of a pattern means that it's hard to tell whether it catches the ridge to the west or whether it gets pulled into the trough to the northeast. This happened with Debbie, though, to a more extreme measure, and I was wrong there as well until the end when the models finally shifted all the way back the other way. And this is just one of those times when we're really glad to have the computers, because they can give you good insight as to what will actually happen. Despite what the pattern favors, I don't think many people realize how rare of a storm track this would be. Storms just don't take this track, and I'm not talking about Louisiana and Mississippi getting hit from the southeast. This happens all the time. Not all the time, but it does happen. But there's only certain ways they get hit. Either something gets completely flipped around in the pattern, like Elena in 85, which came around like this. The steering pattern north of her got completely changed, and she did a loop-de-loop. There was that, or else they're coming over the islands and then coming into the Gulf Coast like George's in 1998. or they're coming from east of Florida and moving in from the east southeast like Betsy in 65. But none of them, there are no tracks that I can find since 1841 in the database of the NHC that come from the Central Caribbean, in the Caribbean, over the islands, and then a straight northwest track into the Central Gulf Coast. It doesn't happen. The reason why being that the ridge, if it has to be this far south to get the storm to be coming northwest from south of the islands, it generally has to hit the weakness over Florida and head out, or else it goes south of all the ridges and goes into the western Gulf. This kind of a track in the middle, straight northwest, it just hasn't happened before as far as I can tell, so this would be a very low probability track. And yesterday I was wrong to say this was a nearly impossible track because you can never say never with the weather. This is probably happening now because of the models being so clustered in here. There's still a lot of uncertainty along the Gulf Coast, though. The cone is very wide, as you'll see in a minute, and folks here shouldn't be letting their guard down, but it does look like the Florida Peninsula may be fairly safe from this, at least the northern part that won't be getting the tropical storm conditions here. But if we look at the water vapor imagery, the intensity of this is going to be the biggest issue now coming into the Gulf of Mexico. There's a lot of warm water in here and there's a lot of fuel around. And as this will be moving into the Gulf here, you can see that the outflow to the west is very well defined, and you can see this upper level low again starting to back away, which split off from this upper trough over the Carolinas, which is moving away. Ridging will be expanding in a bubble between those two features as we've been talking about for the last couple of days, and this should provide a very favorable pattern aloft. The biggest problem, I think, will be this dry air that has become entrained into the circulation and is really doing a number on the storm as a whole since yesterday because of the proximity to Cuba. Once over open water here in the eastern Gulf, that should start to change, and I think this should start to strengthen. And the question will be how fast it can get an inner core. If it does get a core very fast, then it could strengthen more rapidly than forecast. But right now, I think this will steadily intensify through a Category 1 into a Category 2, similar to the NHC, and right now I have it in the upper end of the Category 2 range coming into the coast of Mississippi. But again, because we're in a turning point in the pattern, it's possible that this curves up more like the European, sharply off to the northeast into the trough. It's also possible that the GFS is correct and this crawls along southern Louisiana as it starts to get caught a little bit by the ridge to the west. So the cone fans out quite a bit by the time the storm gets to the Gulf Coast, and the NHC has also mentioned the larger than normal uncertainty in the forecast. So folks along the Gulf Coast here, east to west, should definitely not be taking their eye off this storm. It has been very tricky so far and has been defying a lot of forecasts, and everyone has had to shift west with this. So folks should be prepared. Unfortunately, these folks here weren't really expecting this storm until today, so hopefully folks start to get prepared right away. This is still about 3 days away from landfall, but it is very large, so impacts will be felt a long ways ahead of it and also long ways to either side of it. So this will be a large impacting area for the North Gulf Coast. Alright, that's it for today. Thanks for watching.